welcome to today's Friday show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it. On the show, we are going to be talking about the latest statements from the fiance of Julian Assange, give you an update on his case. This man locked up, kind of really in prison in ways that many would call, and including me, torture by the UK government. He's been subject to a lot of psychological manipulation in a very, very bad way. Of course, now the extradition case is kicking off, and the battle has not subsided under Joe Biden, unfortunately. We'll tell you all you need to know about the case that has fallen apart after the U.S. got caught relying on the testimony of a known criminal and pedophile who committed his criminal acts under the Justice Department's watch. Just an absolutely incredible revelatory report, and we'll give you an even further update about an offer the U.S. has made in light of that. Meanwhile, a new report from the Washington Post about this Capitol riot and right-wing militia culture, and how much of it, especially on the day, was, how now I'm not going to say infiltrated or instigated, but how many people were present in these circles that were members of a three-letter agency. Also, the Democrats cave on voting rights, and we start today with the crisis in Haiti. Welcome to Newsflash 537. Or 8, I'm not quite sure. So, hello everybody, welcome once again, and we are starting with this today, taking you to Haiti, where this is in Jacobin here. It's an interview with Kim Ives I want to go a little bit from. So during the early morning of July 7th, hours before first light, 9 SUVs arrived at the home of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. So to give you a little bit of context here, before we dive into the interview, Moïse had been clinging to the presidency since February, sparking weekly demonstration by thousands of Haitians who accused him of corruption, especially in relation to Petrocaribe, a program in which Venezuela provided Haiti with billions of dollars worth of oil and funding meant to support development. So that kind of controversial program also kind of representing another power, or I guess you'd call it power. I'm not sure if you call Venezuela power, but another force trying to get in there and be the sponsor state of Haiti. But they were, of course, going up against the U.S. and people like Bill Clinton, who had a big role in pushing the quote-unquote development of Haiti. What months of popular protests did not accomplish, a small band of suspected mercenaries carried out in minutes. Claiming to be agents of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA does maintain a presence in Haiti to assist with counter-narcotics operations. The group gained entry into the home and killed the president. Moïse's assassination comes amid increasingly revolutionary fervor in Haiti. The popular demonstrations against corruption, which were supported by the bourgeoisie opponents of the former president, have more recently given way to more openly radical forces, such as those around Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier. A former cop-turned-vigilante leader, Cherizier has sought to unite Haiti's many armed community defense groups, even criminal gangs, under the banner of the revolutionary forces of the G9 family and allies, in order to topple the state altogether. His base is in Haiti's shanty towns, where millions of former peasants now comprise a lumpen proletariat of unemployed workers. While the people behind Moïse's assassination remain unknown, Haiti Liberty editor Kim Ives tells Jacobin that he believes the plot may be an attempt to turn back the revolutionary tide and even bring in U.S. Marines, which is certainly possible because as of now, Haiti has requested U.S. troops in the area, and we'll find out. There's still a lot more we need to find out about this, but I'd say it's pretty likely that they actually end up sending them in there because the U.S. does have a big incentive in being able to maintain control, or at least a friendly regime, which Moïse was. Moïse was U.S. friendly, pro West, pro IMF, pro all that stuff. He was a friend to those forces. So the idea that, this was another Evo Morales situation where there's a coup or an assassination carried out by a United States-backed force, because the guy is a revolutionary, leftist of some sort. That wasn't the case here. So, and of course, it's important not to glorify the other side of this, the G9 family and allies. They're called gangs for a reason. They're not nonviolent protesters who have, in all the times, revolutionary socialist politics first, and that's important to take into account when we understand the situation. So here we go. This is Kim Ives describing what happened here. He says, there was a band of mercenaries with a brand new Nissan patrol vehicles. They clearly had knowledge of the layout of the presidential compound where Moyes lived. They were clearly well-financed and well-prepared. It was a very sophisticated operation. Who had the money to do that, and why would they want to? Haiti Liberty's working hypothesis is that the mercenaries more than likely were hired by one or consortium of the bourgeoisie families who are opposed to Moyes. So, not surprisingly, when a country you have massive amounts of income inequality, and a few big families at the top who have deep ties to colonialism, imperialism, that have managed to stay in power all throughout, and they're not all happy with Moyes either. If this hypothesis is correct, their fear is the uprising that is coming out of Haiti's vast shanty towns, where the lumpen proletariat is organizing itself into armed gangs, which have now vowed to carry out a revolution against the bourgeoisie and the rotten system, as they call it in Haiti. So the gangs are led by Cherzier, or Barbecue, Jimmy Barbecue as they call him, a former gung-ho cop who has been radicalized through misfortune and betrayal, not just by police leadership, but by the bourgeoisie operation and also by Moyes. So it's interesting to see what someone like Barbecue, I'm just going to call him Barbecue because why not? It's going to be interesting to see what happens with someone like Barbecue as a leader of this group of forces, especially if you see someone like the U.S. Marines come in there and put a puppet leader in place, try and set up quote unquote new elections. What will happen there? I think this is definitely very much a developing story. So we're going to keep an eye on it. But he is defending the quote unquote wretched of the earth. This vast number of essentially uprooted people. 50 years ago, Haitian society was a largely rural peasant society, but over the past 35 years, since the fall of Duvalier, the dictator, and the neoliberal reforms championed by Washington in Haiti, the dumping of excess food, everything from flour to rice to oil, has decimated Haitian agriculture. The result is that millions of peasants have been ruined and moved to the cities to join the ranks of this huge lumpen proletariat. The bourgeoisie is absolutely terrified of this revolution. Just this past week, Barbecue said, we're going to come enter your banks, to your car dealership, your grocery store, and take what is ours. The bourgeoisie didn't have any protection from Moyes. He had zero state authority. He was totally isolated, but he was refusing to leave. So I think they had to take him out. The breaking news now is that I see they've killed 4 of the assailants, according to the police, and 2 have been captured. Now, will those 2 give it up who it was that hired them? Do they know themselves? Reginald Boulos is one of Haiti's richest men and the most at odds with Moyes. I think he's for the country. He's had an arrest warrant out against him, which may have motivated his backing of a mercenary unit to kill Moyes. It may have required more than one family more than what one family could have provided. There may be some combination of families involved. This is what's happened in previous coups, such as one against former President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. Basically, a collection was taken up among the bourgeoisie, and they raised tens of thousands of dollars to underwrite a coup in 1991. We see today that President Ivan Duque of Colombia, perhaps the most reactionary president of the South American continent, is proposing that the Organization of American States intervene in Haiti much the same way it intervened in the Dominican Republic, Haiti's neighbor, in 1965. The OAS can get reactionary presidents like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil and a few other countries like Honduras to give some soldiers. But just as was for the Dominican Republic in 1965, the principal backbone of such an OAS force would be the U.S. Marines, which, again, Haiti has already requested U.S. intervention. So, so he pretty much says the reason why people say this wasn't, an act of these military gangs, and why Kim Ives specifically believes this, is he says it was very expensive. They arrived in, as I said, 9 new Nissan patrol vehicles. They clearly spent a lot of time planning, and pretty much by all accounts, a lot of people say these were sophisticated actors. These were people who were not playing around. They knew what they were doing, and they had the whole thing done in a matter of minutes. I could see it if it were a band of Haitian men or women who carried out the attack. Maybe you could say, is this coming from one of those armed neighborhood groups in Port-au-Prince? But these were foreigners speaking Spanish, speaking English, and representing themselves as DEA. This does not fit at all with the MO of the revolutionary forces growing in Haiti shantytowns. This looks more like a mercenary unit, much like the mercenaries who were hired 2 years ago to steal $80 million from the Petrocaribe Fund from the Haitian Central Bank. This is more or less typical of what the bourgeoisie will do. They'll just hire firepower and muscle that they need, the same way they hired thugs from the proletariat in the past to carry out their dirty work. But as Barbecue says, we're no longer working for you, we're not going to do your dirty work, and they had to look overseas. So who are these Americans? So I've heard I believe that there was an American citizen involved in this, so it's going to be interesting to see who are the forces behind this, and if it was like one of these bourgeoisie hired mercenary forces, and especially it's going to be interesting to see if these forces in the cities in Port-au-Prince, and this, as they call it, the lumpen proletariat, what will they do? How will they respond to this provocation that we've seen here? So the Duvalier dictatorship had one big gang called the Tonton Macoutes, the Volunteers for National Security, which was essentially a paramilitary force used to safeguard the interests of the Duvalier family, the eyes, ears, and fists of the regime, and they very effectively guarded the power for 3 decades. But after Jean-Claude Duvalier fled the country in 1986, the Tonton Macoutes became kind of free agents, began preying on popular neighborhoods. They used to strut about, brazenly shaking down people, taking what they wanted from a store, picking any woman they wanted to sleep with, you name it, all sorts of abuse that made them infamous. As they moved into free agent status, after Duvalier's departure, the popular neighborhoods of Haiti set up what they were called kind of vigilance brigades. And these brigades began mostly as a group banging pots and pans and so forth to scare away the marauders, but gradually they became armed and hired by the bourgeoisie to guard their factories or their homes or their land. So pretty much a picture of the real complete lawlessness and just no sense of order, no sense of a common, stable government that people can trust by any stretch of the imagination in Haiti. And it's been that way for such a long time, and you can obviously trace that back to, the very first colonial European that came on with aspirations of conquering, and, the rest happened. The rest went from there. I believe French was the original country there. As the political struggle in Haiti became more and more acute, the gangs became used for all sorts of political crimes, assassinations, and so forth. This moved, as the years went by, into warfare between gangs who were working for the bourgeoisie and others who were working for, say, Aristide Lavallas's government. Aristide's Lavallas government, which was in some antagonism with the bourgeoisie. As a result, the battles were very political. Fast forward to 2019, 2020, 2021, the authority of the state has dwindled to almost nothing. The Moise government is illegitimate, it's reviled for its corruption and repression. The shantytowns and the gangs in them are moving into business for themselves, primarily through kidnapping. And the kidnappings often of poor people of the population, quite indiscriminate and quite random, and sometimes very deadly. So this is why I think it's important to realize that these gangs have very, very checkered pasts of violence, of extortion, of kidnapping, of definitely murder in past times. And that's why it's going to be so interesting to see what their motivations are here and what will happen if and when U.S. troops do come in massive forces on the island. What will these groups do? Will they kind of just bend to United States will, and then kind of the United States will continue to leave a cesspit of corruption and violence that's going to be instigated by people like Barbecue, or will we see Barbecue kind of rise up and lead a armed revolt of the peasantry? Who knows? We'll see. So this is this kind of is where, again, as we get into 2019, 2020, 2021, we see these kidnappings coming up. Even if the ransom was paid, the victim, the hostage, the kidnappee would be possibly even killed. It became really a total terror and trauma for Haitian society. Enter Cherizier, a cop with an elite unit of the Haitian National Police called the UDMO, the Department Unit of Maintenance of Order. In November of 2017, he was ordered by police leadership to put together a team of 10 people from the station he commanded in Cité Soleil to carry a raid against the gangs in the area of Martissant. There ensued a dramatic battle between cops and gang members. A number of gang members were killed and maybe some civilians. It's unclear exactly what happened. Police leadership said that this was a rogue operation, and they tried to pretty much pin it on him. They say Chorizo Barbecue went rogue, and he went after these gang members, and pretty much they hung him out to dry, making him the scapegoat, and this started the radicalization process. He started to see that this force he'd been so devoted to was betraying him and trying to use him to cover for their own screw-ups. After that, Chorizo went back to his neighborhood, which was played with these kidnappers and rapists. He went to his UDMO buddies to these gangs and said, "Listen, you guys got a choice. You can either stop what you're going to do, you can leave the area, or we're going to kill you." They fled, most of these gang members, and they went to other parts of town. So Chorizo Barbecue started a reputation as a vigilance brigade on steroids. He was very serious, a law and order guy. He started to develop a reputation. He started to develop a relationship with some of the opposition powers, such as the bourgeoisie who were opposed to Moise. And these bourgeoisie, they're not good forces either. They want to see a Haiti that looks a lot like the one right now, but just with them on top instead of people like Moise. So Chorizo started to enter conflict with these guys, though, as well. So, for instance, Boulos had asked him to burn down a Toyota dealership that his people in the neighborhood had more or less provided protection and caretaking for a long time. He was very shocked by this, and that's when he kind of started to sour on opposition figures, bourgeoisie opposition figures as well. And that gave him to the perception that, we kind of hope he's getting the perception as this big leader of a massive group of kind of gangs that not just the police, not just the government, but also the opposition, the bourgeoisie was rotten, and he pretty much continued the radicalization process. And now he's pretty much says that this whole rotten, stinking system he wants to destroy, and that includes, as he calls it, the 12 families that rule Haiti. They must go as well. When asked if he thought that the assassination of Moise will force the presidential election he was stalling, Kim Ives says no. The assassination is meant to get into power a president who will do the bidding of the bourgeoisie. The opposition, which is dominated by the bourgeoisie, have been calling for a transitional government for a while, and maybe now they will get it. The big question is there anybody who has enough power or backing or sympathy from the people to carry out and overhaul the state? Is there a president and a prime minister and a police chief who are going to have enough strengths and smarts and wherewithal to stop this uprising with the shanty towns? I doubt it very much. A very, very interesting situation going on in Haiti. We will continue to follow it here on Newsflash, and that was some reporting there from Kim Ives of Haiti Liberté. He was being interviewed in Jacobin by Arvin Dilwar. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. I want to tell you a little bit about our lineup for this summer. We start off with Newsflash, all new, of course, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You can't miss it. It's our flagship show to get caught up on everything happening in the world around you. But stick around for some history and some entertainment. Learn about all the things you never learned in history class every Thursday with Hidden History. And get ready for a fun night out or turn your living room into the club with uncultured live mixes every Saturday all summer long. The Spencer Walsh Radio Network is your home for summer sounds coming all season long. Every podcast is available everywhere, so you have no excuse not to listen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to Julian Assange. We're seeing a very interesting situation going on with him. U.S. assurances that Julian Assange would not be held on the strictest maximum security conditions if extradited from the UK have been rejected by his fiancée, who described them as a formula to keep him in prison for the rest of his life. So this is what's going on now. This kind of comes after this very embarrassing moment for the United States. I just want to go to a clip from Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! On this.
Now to a major development in the case of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who the U.S. State Department is pushing to extradite from Britain. Assange faces up to 175 years in prison if brought to the United States, where he's been indicted for violations of the Espionage Act related to the publication of classified documents, which many say expose U.S. war crimes.
Well, yeah, she's right about that. They do expose U.S. war crimes. And pretty much what they were, he worked in concert with Chelsea Manning. This is what they're really trying to go after him for. And they're saying that the big crime that he did, because he can't really go after, the publishing of classified information, because people do that, journalists do that all the time. And the Supreme Court ruled on this already in the United States in favor of the New York Times in a little something called the U.S. versus the New York Times in the Pentagon Papers situation. The New York Times trying to publish the Pentagon Papers. It was classified, but they ruled that it was okay. But what they're really trying to ding Assange up on, which is still going to be, many people believe, an implication of many other journalists as well, is he helped Chelsea Manning, get the classified documents, which by pretty much all accounts that are trustworthy is not true. She pretty much had them all in the first place, and the only thing that he had to do was just kind of receive them and publish them. That case is falling apart, and now we have this very interesting development.
Now one of the main witnesses in that extradition case has come forward to admit he made false claims against Assange for exchange in immunity from prosecution. The revelation came in an interview with the convicted Icelandic hacker, Siggi Þórðarson, for a detailed article published by the Icelandic biweekly Stundin. It suggests the U.S. Justice Department collaborated with Þórðarson to generate the indictment for Assange that was submitted to the British courts. U.S. prosecutors issued a new superseding indictment against Assange in June 2020 that refers to Þórðarson as a teenager and Iceland as NATO country one, and says Assange encouraged him to, among other things, quote, commit computer intrusion and steal audio recordings of phone conversations between Icelandic officials. The Stundin article cites previously unpublished documents and chat logs showing how Þórðarson falsely presented himself as a prominent WikiLeaks representative. Stundin reports that, in fact, quote, all indications are that Þórðarson was acting alone without any authorization, let alone urging from anyone inside WikiLeaks, unquote. For more, we're joined by Jennifer Robinson, human rights attorney.
Okay, so this pretty much shows you really what was happening there. This guy, he was making stuff up for immunity from Assange. What was he in trouble for? Well, I believe it was that he crashed a car and was going to face some time for that. Also, he was a known, he got in trouble for, molesting girls. He was a pedophile. And these crimes were apparently, he knowingly continued them. You can go read the Sun article. He knowingly continued them under the watch of the U.S. Justice Department while he was working with the U.S. Justice Department. So it really shows you the just rock bottom, below the barrel that they're willing to scrape to get some of this stuff through. They're just trying absolutely everything when it comes to getting Assange locked up. And this leads to this new report about this offer that was been rejected by his fiancée. Details of the proposal made to British authorities emerged after permission was granted this week to appeal against January's ruling that the WikiLeaks co-founder cannot be extradited on mental health grounds. And the funny thing about that was, obviously, it's not funny. It's more, I would say, it's a little disappointing. But the kind of horrifying thing about that was the judge was like, yeah, I get you on the merits of the case, but we can't extradite them to the U.S. prisons because they're so bad, and he's in such a bad way already that he'll probably end up committing suicide. So that's pretty much where he was at there. Really, really rough situation over there. And pretty much the insurances here include that Assange, if convicted in relation to charges of his alleged espionage and hacking, would be allowed to serve any jail time in his native Australia. The package contains a particular assurance that Assange would not be subject to special administrative measures in U.S. custody or imprisoned at the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, procedures reserved for high-security prisoners. The assurances were subject to change if we were to quote-unquote do something subsequently that met the U.S. test for imposition of these high security measures. So pretty much what I'm thinking there in my mind is, oh, well, they're going to try and frame him for something to get these measures on him. But, we don't know about that. It's certainly not impossible. That's what they're thinking. But again, we don't know at the time. Details were contained in excerpts of the UK court ruling granted limited permission to appeal, which were released to the Crown Prosecution Service. In January, the district judge, Vanessa Bereitzer, ruled that Assange could not be extradited over concerns of his mental health and risk of suicide in U.S. prison. Stella Morris, who is Assange's fiancée, described reports that U.S. undertakings were grossly misleading, adding about 80,000 prisoners in U.S. prisons were held in solitary confinement on any given day, and only a handful were held in conditions specifically mentioned in the proposal. So there's a lot of bad things that could still happen to him that were not part of these special administrative measures umbrella that would be quite devastating. The U.S. government also says it may change its mind if the head of the CIA advises it to do so once Julian Assange is held in U.S. custody. So making a good point there. In relation to him serving jail time in Australia, she said it had always been his right to request a prison transfer to finish serving his sentence, so not really too much of a big victory for him if that was always his right. What is crucial to understand is that the prisoner transfers are eligible only after all appeals have been exhausted. For the case to reach U.S. Supreme Court, it could easily take a decade, even two. What the U.S. is proposing is a formula to keep Julian in prison effectively for the rest of his life. Nick Vamos, a partner at the Peters & Peters law firm and former head of extradition at the Crown Prosecution Service, said it was highly unusual for the U.S. Justice Department to offer broader assurances to a foreign court on prisoner treatment up front. He said, in fact, it had previously been refused to do so in terrorism cases. So congratulations to the Justice Department for coming to the realization that Julian Assange is not a terrorist on the level of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Great, you figured that one out. While a date has yet to be set for a high court hearing in relation to the U.S. appeal, Vamos suggested that things could move quite quickly. While the ruling earlier this year had gone in Assange's favor, he added the difficulty he and his legal team now have is that if the court says we are denying extradition because we are concerned about his treatment, we are worried that A, B, or C might happen, and the requesting state then provides assurance which says under no circumstances will that happen, then that will defeat that objection. There's a long-standing history of our courts accepting the assurances from requesting states. The question is, does the assurance does the assurance address it in fact, or can it be undermined by suggesting that it is not quite as good as it appears, or they will just dishonor it anyway? So that's the thing that the Assange lawyers now have to prove. And another big win, of course, was that he is now one of the key witnesses in the case, even if he is extradited. But then the case will really start to take long. If he is extradited, they're going to keep him in prison for a long time because the case for him is not that good. I mean, if they get in front of the right judge, it's certainly possible that the U.S. government, especially with this lost witness, could have some real trouble. But the extradition would really, by all accounts, be devastating for Assange. All right, let's move on to our next story. In the Washington Post here, after storming the Capitol on January 6th, Northern Virginia man began forming his own militia-like group in the D.C. suburbs and building up a supply of explosives under the guise of a Bible study group, according to federal prosecutors. Phi Dong appeared in court in Friday and was released to home confinement pending trial over the objections of prosecutors who sought stricter terms. According to the court record, at the time of his arrest, he had several guns, including an AK-47 and the material to make 50 Molotov cocktails. Details of the case, one of the first, if not the only, not the first in which the government publicly disclosed it had someone undercover to continue monitoring a January 6th defendant, were made public Tuesday. So I think this is, to me, just some guy had Molotov cocktails in his basement. That's one thing, but the other thing is this kind of bearing in the lead here. Details of this case, one of the first, if not the first, in which the government publicly disclosed it as someone undercover to continue monitoring a January 6th defendant, were made public Tuesday. So this is key. What we know here is that there were at least one undercover agents deeply embedded in this Bible study group that was being led by this guy who just got arrested and had all these Molotov cocktails in his basement. There was an FBI person in there. So that raises the question, if an FBI informant, at least one, was in a key group here that went deep inside the Capitol, was past the restricted zone, and it says in this indictment they were past the restricted zone of the Capitol. Then if they knew enough to embed an informant in there for possibly months ahead of time, then why did it still happen? Why was this still allowed to happen? And the FBI didn't do anything about it because they clearly everybody knew it was coming. Anybody who had spent 20 minutes on Donald Wynn's site or whatever the forum was called, they knew it was going to come. But we saw a complete failure, a complete, utter, and total failure, just letting these guys pretty much in the building. And that, I think, is really where the questions raise. And I'm not trying to say that the FBI was, instigating this. We don't know that yet, but I think it is a key step in terms of validation for people who a lot of people on the left may not like to see validated on this Capitol riot issue. And I think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch because I don't know exactly what could happen, but the FBI has had a long history of instigating people to do bad things and pressuring people, using material motivations in their life against them, pressuring them in really to do exactly what they want and getting deep inside these groups, and then they have a pretty poor track record of actually stopping the things that they end up trying to do. So it is not a good sign to see this report that there was a defendant in there. An undercover officer in D.C., with the D.C. police first encountered Dong at the Capitol on January 6th, according to the government. Dong described himself as an operator and later explained he wore all black to look at it like an Antifa activist, the government alleged in court documents. In a video later seen by investigators, Dong is identified in court documents as shouting, "We're coming for you, Nancy," and pushing a fellow protester toward the doors on the Senate side of the building. They stayed in touch, and a week later, Dong told this undercover officer he was part of a cloak and dagger group that will build resistance for what will inevitably come. In March, he told associates, "Keep your guns ready to use and be ready to use them." He and others held a Bible study where they discussed firearms and other training according to court documents. Dong brought someone he described as a 3%er to one meeting. The right-wing 3% movement was made off of the false claim that built off the false claim that 3% of the colonists only fought in the American Revolution. Several adherents have been charged with conspiring to storm the Capitol. So, yeah, very, very interesting stuff that this is going on. I talked about the surveillance of the Capitol building. And in February, an associate took some footage of it, according to prosecutors. He talks about freeing alleged rioters who are behind bars, saying, according to the government, "I see that as an opportunity. With every great revolution, you go to the prisons and break them out." So this is where his mind at. He's a Vietnamese guy. He's fled communism in the past, and you can tell that this is the mindset he is bringing into it. But I think really what I want to watch here is what I want to watch here is some of the thing that is this relationship, this very interesting find out a little bit more about this undercover official here. So according to court documents, he and the undercover agents toured the jail in Lorton, Virginia, where he talked about testing out explosives. He told the agent, the government alleged, that he was working on a manifesto saying, "If I get into a gunfight with the feds and don't make it, I want to be able to transfer as much wisdom to my son as possible." Prosecutors say he discussed how far he could shoot on his family's property in the event of a raid and said it would be the site of a second Waco. So great illustration there of where his head was at. And he said, of course, his preparations were for defense, according to the government. U.S. Magistrate Judge Michael Harvey declined to impose tougher restrictions on Dong's release, knowing the government did not seek to jail Dong as a flight risk or threat to the community. He is charged with illegally entering the Capitol, obstructing the vote count, and disorderly conduct, but not with planning or committing violence. So, yeah, that is going to be very interesting to see what this relationship to undercover officers actually is, and really just get a sense of what they were doing and the role that they had. That is, I think, the biggest key to understanding why this was allowed to happen. Because remember, if these guys had been doing their job, if the federal law enforcement agencies, if Capitol Police had been doing their job, this would not have happened. So what is this role? We're going to keep an eye on it for you here on Newsflash, of course. But we're going to go to our next story. It's in the discourse. Paul Bless writing, over the course of the past decade, Democratic Party, civil liberties advocates, and voting rights groups have fought tooth and nail to stop conservative legislators to enact voter ID laws with varying degrees of success. But after centrist Democratic Senator Joe Manchin offered up a compromise on voting rights last month, some of the Democrats indicated they would be willing to accept voter ID as a condition to pursue broader voting rights reforms. And now, even as that proposal looks to be dead on arrival, a top Democrat went on TV to claim actually the Democrats never opposed ID in principle at all. And, of course, one of my favorite Democrats, Jim Clyburn, the number 3 House Democrat, who was last seen bowling his way into an Ohio special election, stopped Sanders' presidential campaign co-chair Nina Turner from getting into Congress, appeared on CNN on July 4th to talk about voting rights and said Democrats were absolutely for voter ID laws. When I first registered to vote as a 21-year-old, I got a voter registration card and always present a voter registration card when I go to vote. That is voter ID. We are always for voter ID. We were never for disproportionate voter ID, he added. Which, I mean, honestly, I think it's not the craziest thing to say. But it's not like he was entirely consistent here. And because a big thing about this voter ID debate is, where do you draw the line? Does it have to be a driver's license? Does it have to be a utility bill? Like, it could be a lot of different things. I think if every person was mailed, every registered voter was mailed a voter ID law and with no problems, or a voter identification card like Clyburn said he had that back then, and everyone just got it and was able to vote for it, I vote with it. Like, I don't think it would be a problem. But the inequities, the inequalities, the screw-ups, and the screw-ups disproportionately affecting, quote-unquote screw-ups, disproportionately affecting a single group of people that may be more likely to vote for the Democratic Party is where I think a lot of ire comes. I think rightfully so. So he says that he was drawing the line again at an equitable ID. You ought to be able to vote with any ID you have, one being your voter registration card. Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock said that after the Manchin proposal that he was never opposed to any voter ID. In fact, I don't know anybody who believes people shouldn't have to prove that they are who they say they are. Clyburn has been all over the place on voter ID in the past. In April 2012, when his state passed a photo voter ID law, Clyburn compared it to Jim Crow, warning that we must make sure that the people are aware that of the danger to our democracy. A month later, however, then again later in September, Clyburn said that voter ID is not a problem. Interesting. But broadly speaking, Democrats have been long opposed to voter ID laws. In 2014, Biden said the voter ID laws were an attempt to repress minority voting, masquerading as an attempt to end corruption. The Obama Justice Department sued to stop these laws from going into effect, and Hillary Clinton blamed her 2016 loss in Wisconsin on the state's voter ID law. And Bernie, and Jill Stein, and the weather, and the Russians, we get it, Hillary. And they have good reason to be opposed to laws, and this is the big thing. Tens of millions of American voters don't have photo identification like a driver's license, and the laws disproportionately target poor people of color for the reasons Clyburn mentioned, back when he was, one of the times where he was opposed to voter ID laws. As of 2019, for example, a dozen states with voter ID laws on the books did not accept all student IDs in lieu of driver's licenses, not to mention it's a solution in search of a problem. Time and time again, election after election has shown that voter fraud does not exist to any substantial degree whatsoever. But this stance changed last month when Manchin was bewilderingly drawn a line in the sand at only taking up voting rights reforms deemed acceptable by the party whose former presidential candidate is still trying to steal the election he lost 8 months ago, came out with a compromise which includes requiring voter ID with acceptable alternatives such as an energy bill to prove who you say you are. Again, if people are just able to broadly prove, anything with their name on it, if the restrictions on voting rights are sufficiently loose so that people can actually, vote, then that is something I am for. I support that. I think it makes sense if people are who they say they are. But again, it is a solution in search of a problem, and definitely not the best thing we should be focusing on. Probably my last priority, because again, voter fraud largely does not exist to any, completely does not exist to any statistically significant margin. But what is, I think, very interesting and important is the fact that, like why is this stuff happening? Like, what are the motivations? What are people trying to get from it? And Clyburn, he changed his position with the wind, and I think we can kind of tell why. So the plan, which among other things would also ban partisan gerrymandering and mandate more than 2 weeks of early voting, was quickly backed by Democrats, including Stacey Abrams, the former and potentially future Georgia gubernatorial candidate, who's become the country's most visible voting rights advocate. Manchin's proposal is a give and take of liberal and conservative wants. If you're going to mistake the taking at face value, the conservative claim that voter ID laws are about election integrity rather than maintaining power and relevancy. The biggest problem with the plan, accordingly, is that even though the entire goal of Manchin's compromise was to make Republicans happy, they almost immediately dismissed it, some of them for the simple reason that Stacey Abrams had endorsed it. So this is the clip.
I think every one of us looks for opportunities to work with Senator Manchin, and we found those opportunities. I actually think when Stacey Abrams immediately endorsed Senator Manchin's proposal, it became the Stacey Abrams substitute, not the Joe Manchin substitute. I think,
again, an absolute complete joke, and just really shows you how disinterested they are in working for this, and which I think it's the signs have been there. At this point, it's the Democrats who are stupid for trying to work with them. And some do so, I think, beyond stupidity, but that's a conversation for a whole nother day. All right. So we got for you today. This has been Newsflash. We will come back on Monday, and possibly we'll have an Uncultured for you sometime soon.